My name is Ruby Fraser. I'm 68 years old, and if you'd asked me 10 years ago where I thought my life would be, I never would have sat here running a small bakery cafe in Louisville, Kentucky. That morning started like most others. I was behind the counter, wiping things down after the early crowd of regulars. The coffee pots were fresh, the bread was cooling on the racks, and a couple of neighbors sat by the window reading the paper. It was quiet, the kind of morning I liked. At this age, I'd learned to enjoy calm moments. The bell over the door rang. I looked up, ready to smile at whoever came in. But when I saw who it was, I froze. My son Tom, and right behind him, Julia, his wife. The same two people I hadn't seen in 10 long years. For a second, I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was them. Tom's hair had thinned a little, his shoulders rounded. Julia's face was tighter, her smile stiff, the kind of smile people put on when they don't know what else to do. And then there were the two teenagers with them. My grandchildren, kids I had never been allowed to meet until that moment. I gripped the counter with both hands, feeling the ground shift under me. I pictured this day for years, but I never imagined it would happen like this. Inside the bakery I had built from scratch after they were gone. Tom walked up slowly, like he wasn't sure if I'd throw him out. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice low. Julia followed, right behind, speaking quick, like she wanted to get to the point before I could cut her off. "Ruby, we came to talk. Things have changed. We were hoping you might have something for us here. Jobs. A chance to get back on our feet. Jobs." That word rang in my head, out of everything they could have said to me after 10 years. "No, sorry. No, we were wrong. No, we should never have done what we did. Just jobs. I want you to understand something. These were the same two people who drained every last penny of my life savings. The money I had worked for decades to put away, the money that was supposed to keep me safe in retirement. They convinced me to hand it over, promising it was for a future we'd all share. And then they vanished, disappeared without a word, leaving me broke and alone. And now here they were, standing in my bakery with their children, asking me to give them a fresh start like none of it had ever happened. I kept my hands steady on the counter, though inside, my chest was tight. The customers by the window glanced up from their coffee, sensing something was off. I forced a calm voice. "Well," I said, "this is a surprise." Tom shifted his weight, just like he used to when he was a boy caught doing something wrong. "We didn't know where else to turn. Things have been hard for us. We thought maybe you might have some work for us here." Julia jumped in, her words polished, practiced. "We know it's been a long time. Too long. But maybe this is a chance to reconnect. We want to put the past behind us." Reconnect. Those words stung. 10 years of silence. 10 years of pretending I didn't exist. And now they wanted to reconnect because they needed something. I looked at the two teenagers. They stood awkwardly near the door, eyes moving between me and their parents, unsure of what to say. I wondered if they even knew who I was. Did they know the full story? Did they know why I hadn't been part of their lives? The air in the room felt heavy. Every sound, the coffee machine hissing, the door closing behind them, seemed louder than it should. I wanted to say 100 things at once. I wanted to ask why they had done it, why they had taken my savings and cut me off, why they had let a decade pass without a single phone call, not even a card at Christmas. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tell them they had no right to stand there asking for jobs when they had left me with nothing, but I didn't do any of that. Instead, I wiped my hands on a towel and looked at them calmly. "You want jobs," I repeated, like I was making sure I'd heard them right. Tom nodded. Julia gave a quick smile, trying to soften me. "Yes, we're willing to do whatever's needed. We just need a chance." I glanced back at the tables, where my customers were still pretending not to listen. I didn't want to air my pain in front of them, so I motioned toward a corner booth. "Let's sit down," I said. They slid into the booth, Julia straightening her skirt, Tom leaning on his elbows. The kids sat at the edge, looking nervous. I sat across from them, my hands folded on the table. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't the same woman I was 10 years ago. Back then, I had been desperate for their approval, willing to do anything to keep my family close, even if it meant handing over the money I'd worked for all my life. But now, I was different. I had built this business with my own 2 hands. I had survived the years they left me with nothing. I wasn't powerless anymore. Still, as I looked at their faces, all I could think was, this day was always going to come, and I'd better be ready for it. Sitting at that booth in my bakery with Tom and Julia staring back at me, my mind went straight to the past. I couldn't help it. Everything they were asking for now pulled me right back to the day it all started. I was 55 then, widowed for almost a decade. I worked as an office administrator at a trucking company in Louisville. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and it paid enough for me to keep a roof over my head. I didn't go on trips or buy fancy things. Instead, I saved. Every paycheck, I put something aside. It wasn't much at first, but over the years, that account became my safety net. My security fund, I used to call it. I knew one thing for sure. Nobody was going to take care of me but me. I had Social Security to look forward to, but it wasn't going to stretch far. That savings account was what let me sleep at night. It was my plan for the future. Then came the day Tom and Julia showed up at my kitchen table with big smiles and bigger promises. They were in their late 20s then. Tom had just finished a job he didn't like, and Julia had been bouncing around between teaching jobs. They said they wanted to start fresh, build something of their own. "We've got the perfect idea," Tom said, his eyes lit up like a salesman. "A franchise gym. It's booming right now. Everyone's signing up for memberships. We just need the upfront investment, and it's guaranteed to grow." Julia nodded along, laying out numbers on a brochure they brought. She talked about how the franchise company would train them, how all they needed was someone to believe in them and help them get started. I remember sitting there, my coffee going cold, listening to them with my hands folded. Something inside me was uneasy. I'd spent my whole life around working folks, truck drivers, dispatchers, secretaries. I knew there was no such thing as guaranteed. But then I looked at Tom. He was my only child. I thought maybe this was his chance to finally stand on his own 2 feet. Maybe this was my chance to see him succeed, to help his family grow. "Mom," he said, leaning forward, "we can make this work. We just need a little help from you. Once it's up and running, we'll pay you back every cent. And you'll be proud of us." That word, proud, it hit me. I wanted to be proud of him. I wanted him to know I believed in him. So even though my gut told me to hold back, my heart overruled my head. I went to the bank, withdrew nearly everything I had saved over 30 years, and handed it over. I told myself it was temporary, that I was just giving him a leg up. For a while, it looked like maybe it might work. They sent me photos of the gym opening. They told me how excited they were, how people were signing up for memberships. I clung to those updates like a lifeline, trying to believe I had done the right thing. But then the calls slowed down. The updates stopped. I called the gym one afternoon, and the number had been disconnected. When I finally reached Tom, he was short with me. "It's just a setback, Mom. Don't worry about it." That was the last real conversation we had. Within months, the gym closed. The money was gone. And so were they. No calls, no visits, not even a note explaining what happened. Just silence. I tried to reach out. I called his cell phone. Sometimes it rang, sometimes it went straight to voicemail. I left messages, but they were never returned. I sent letters, but none came back. I even mailed a Christmas card that year, and it was returned to me with no forwarding address stamped on the envelope. I can't explain the feeling. Losing the money was one thing. It hurt, yes, but I could always find a way to work harder, to rebuild. But losing my son, that broke something deeper. Every morning, I'd wake up and hope maybe that would be the day I'd hear from him. Maybe I'd see his name on the caller ID. Maybe he'd stop by, even just to check on me. But nothing came. And as weeks turned into months and months turned into years, I had to face the truth. He hadn't just lost the money. He had chosen to cut me out of his life completely. It wasn't just about dollars and cents. It was about trust, about family, about the bond between a mother and a son. And that bond had been shattered. I can still remember one night sitting at the kitchen table alone, staring at the bank statement with a zero balance. My hands were shaking. I thought to myself, you spent 30 years building this safety net, and you let it slip through your fingers because you wanted to believe in him. The betrayal burned deep, not only because of the money, but because of the silence that followed. No explanation, no apology, just the empty space where my son used to be. It's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. People think money is just numbers on paper. But when you're older, and you know there's no do-over, no second career, no big paycheck waiting to fix mistakes, that money means survival. It means safety. It means peace of mind. Losing it is like losing the ground under your feet. But worse than that was the loneliness, knowing my son could take everything I had, and then vanish, leaving me to pick up the pieces, left me questioning everything. Did I raise him wrong? Did I spoil him? Did I make it too easy for him to walk away? I'll never forget that sting. It stayed with me through every long day that followed. And now, sitting across from him in my bakery after 10 silent years, hearing him ask me for a job, all I could think was, you took my life savings and then you took yourself. And now you think you can walk back in like nothing happened? After Tom and Julia vanished, I had no choice but to start over. I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of bills and a notebook. The numbers were tight. Rent, insurance, utilities, groceries. There wasn't any cushion left. I circled the total at the bottom and told myself the truth. I had to work more and spend less, or I wasn't going to make it. I went in early to the trucking office the next day and asked for extra hours. My manager, Nita, looked at me over her glasses and said, if you can handle it, we've got backlog. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I stayed late filing bills of lading, matching delivery times to invoices, and checking driver logs. I cleaned up old files no one had touched in years. The hours added up. So did the small stretch of my paycheck. At home, I cut everything I could. Cable went first. I swapped my phone plan for a cheaper one. I started packing lunch again. I checked the grocery ads, picked sale days, and cooked big pots of food, so nothing went to waste. I wrote down every purchase for 3 months straight. It was simple, but it kept me honest. A few weeks in, a driver named Amos stopped by my desk and complained that tax time always hit him hard. He was an owner-operator and kept his receipts in a shoebox. I told him I could sort them and make a simple ledger if he wanted. He paid me in cash that Friday. After that, he sent 2 friends. Soon I had a steady side stream. Fuel, tolls, repairs, per diem, all lined up on a spreadsheet. It wasn't fancy. It was neat and correct. Word got around. I set aside those payments in a separate savings account and pretended it didn't exist. I called it the rebuild. The first holiday season after the money was gone was the hardest. I kept the lights off on Halloween and read in the bedroom until it passed. On Thanksgiving, I made a small plate and ate at the table like I always did, but I didn't set out extra forks. On Christmas morning, I brewed coffee and took a walk before the streets got busy. I didn't put up a tree. I didn't have it in me. People assume holidays get easier with time. Maybe they do, but that first year, everything was loud in my head, even the quiet. At work, routine saved me. Mondays were vendor checks. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I ran aging reports. Wednesdays belonged to compliance, DOT files, medical cards, mileage summaries. Fridays, I stayed late and balanced the week. Between that and the bookkeeping, the days filled up. When my mind wandered to Tom, I pulled a new folder and kept going. I still called his number now, and then, not often, maybe once every few months. Sometimes it rang, sometimes it cut straight to voicemail. I left simple messages. It's Mom. I hope you're all right. I learned not to say more. I kept the phone by the bed for a long time, thinking if he called in the night, I would hear it. He never did. Sundays were laundry and a list. I wrote what I needed to do for the week. Pay electric, call insurance, finish Amos's quarterly, pick up printer ink. I leaned on the list the way some folks lean on a cane. If I did the next thing, I wouldn't fall over. Most days, that was enough. My body felt the hours. My shoulders ached from reaching for boxes. My eyes got tired from numbers at night. I learned when to stand up and stretch, to walk the warehouse aisle and back. I kept a small bottle of lotion at my desk for the cold months and a pair of flats in the drawer for days my feet gave out. It wasn't pretty, but it kept me moving. I said yes to extra work when it made sense, and no when it didn't. A small repair shop asked me to help clean up their books for a month. I fitted in and used the pay to build a tiny emergency fund. I took a short online class on spreadsheets through the library so I could work faster. I didn't post about any of it. I didn't tell many people. I just kept going. Every so often, someone would ask about Tom. Folks mean well. How's your boy? I learned to say, we're not in touch right now. Most people nodded and changed the subject. A few pressed for details, and I excused myself to the copier. I wasn't ready to unpack the whole story at the coffee machine. I found small ways to take back my space. I boxed up extra things around the apartment and drove them to the thrift store. I made a file called Home Binder and put copies of every important paper inside: ID, insurance, bank info, medical contacts. Having it all in one place made me feel steady. I cleaned out the drawer where I kept old photos and slid Tom's school pictures into an envelope. I didn't throw them away. I just moved them out of sight. It gave me a little peace. One evening, a woman from church named Alma invited me to a Tuesday supper they hosted. I went. It wasn't fancy, potluck casseroles and coffee. People sat, ate, and talked about nothing special. I sat by the door the first time. I went back the next week and brought cornbread. They thanked me and asked for the recipe. I didn't talk about Tom. I didn't have to. Just sitting with people who knew my name and asked if I wanted more tea helped me keep my chin up. Money crawled back into my savings account in bits. 50 here from a ledger job. 100 there for cleaning up a stack of receipts. My tax refund went straight to the rebuild. When the car needed brakes, I used the emergency fund and didn't touch the rebuild. That felt like a win. After a year, I had enough to sleep a little easier. Not much, but enough. Birthdays came and went. I baked myself a small cake and shared slices with the ladies in the office. They laughed when I insisted on paper plates so we wouldn't wash dishes. On New Year's Eve, I wrote out 5 small goals in a notebook. Nothing fancy. Keep the side work steady. Walk 3 times a week. Pay off the store card. Try a new bread each month. Call the dentist and actually go. I checked them off one by one. I didn't fix everything, but I kept my word to myself. which mattered more than I expected. Even with the routine, the question sat at the back of my mind like a light that wouldn't turn off. Why didn't he at least call? I could have handled. We lost it, and we're ashamed. I could have handled. We moved, and we're starting over. Silence was the hardest. It felt like I was erased from his map. I stopped looking for them on social media after a while. Seeing pictures without context did more harm than good. 3 years after the money was gone, Nita asked if I wanted to train a new hire. Teaching someone made me realize how much I knew. I could set up a filing system in my sleep. I could read a freight bill and tell you what went wrong by line 3. I could open a ledger and see what needed fixing before anyone said a word. That gave me back a kind of pride I hadn't felt since before the loss. On Saturdays, I started baking bread again. Not to sell, just to settle my mind. Kneading dough gave my hands something to do that wasn't paperwork. I shared loaves with the neighbors. A man down the hall asked if I could make 2 for his sister's birthday. I did, and he tucked $20 under my doormat even though I told him not to. I put it in the rebuild and wrote bread next to it. When you're rebuilding, every small line means something. After 5 years, I looked at my accounts and realized I was no longer in danger. I wasn't rich. I wasn't even comfortable, but I wasn't scared every time the mail came. I could handle a tire, a copay, a broken appliance. That feeling, being able to absorb a hit, brought my shoulders down for the first time in a long while. I still thought about Tom. I still wondered where they were. I still kept the same phone number in case he ever wanted to reach me. But I learned to keep moving without that call. I learned that my day could be full and decent even if the phone stayed quiet. That is how I climbed out. Not with a grand plan, not with a lucky break, just with a schedule, a pencil, and a promise to myself that I would not go under. I worked the plan, paid what I owed, and built slow. I didn't know it then, but those years of steady steps were laying the ground for the next chapter of my life, the chapter that brought me to the bakery, where I was now sitting across from the same 2 people who took my savings and disappeared. And as I looked at them in that booth, older and asking for work, I felt the weight of those rebuilding years settle in me like a backbone. I had earned my footing. I wasn't going to give it away again. 10 years. That's how long I lived without a word from my only son. After I lost my savings, I told myself I would hear from him once things settled down. Maybe he needed time. Maybe he was embarrassed. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, thinking any day the phone would ring. But days turned into weeks, then months, then years. The silence stretched on so long that it became its own kind of answer. My mailbox told the story. It filled with bills, ads, and notices, but never letters with his name on the corner. I checked anyway. Every day, I flipped through envelopes and wondered if one would finally hold a message from him. There never was. I found out I had become a grandmother in the most sideways way. One afternoon, I ran into a woman who used to live on my street. We were standing in line at the grocery store, and she smiled like she was sharing good news. "Congratulations, Ruby," she said. "I heard Tom and Julia had a little girl." I froze with my cart. That was how I learned I had a grandchild. Not from Tom, not from Julia, not from a phone call with excitement in their voices, from a neighbor at the store who thought I already knew. I nodded like I was in on the news, but inside I felt hollow. Later, I searched online, and sure enough, there was a photo posted. A newborn wrapped in a pink blanket, Tom and Julia smiling beside her. The caption read, "Our hearts are full." They didn't tag me. They didn't mention me. I wasn't part of that story. It didn't stop there. Over the years, I learned about every big milestone the same way, by accident. Another neighbor mentioned a second baby. Photos online showed birthdays with cakes, balloons, and candles I never got to light. School concerts, soccer games, family barbecues. Every picture was a reminder that life was moving forward without me. Funerals came and went, too. Distant relatives passed away. I heard about services after they were over. My name was never included on the calls or the invitations. When my sister-in-law died, I only knew because someone from church mentioned it. By then, the service had already taken place. I sat in my living room that night and thought, how did it come to this? There were weddings, too. A cousin of Tom's got married. I saw the photos online, Tom and Julia dressed up, smiling, dancing. Everyone gathered under one roof while I wasn't even told. I sat at home that weekend folding laundry, completely unaware until the pictures showed up on my screen. Every year that passed without contact dug the wound deeper. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was strong. But the truth is, being cut out of your child's life is a pain you carry everywhere. It lingers in the background of every ordinary day. The hardest part wasn't the big events I missed. It was the everyday things. I wondered what my grandchildren liked to eat. I wondered what books they read in school. Did they have my eyes? Did they know my name? Or had they been told I didn't exist? I tried reaching out in the early years. I mailed cards for birthdays and Christmas. They came back unopened, stamped, returned to sender. I stopped sending them after a while because each envelope returned felt like a door slamming shut. The phone stayed silent. On holidays, I'd keep it close, hoping. I'd dial Tom's number once or twice, only to hear voicemail. My voice would shake as I left short messages. It's Mom. I just want to know you're all right. The calls were never returned. Eventually, I stopped dialing. When you live through that kind of silence, you find ways to fill the empty space. For me, it started with church. I'd always gone on Sundays, but in those years, I leaned on it more. I joined a women's group that met midweek. We prayed, but we also shared meal-swapped recipes and helped each other when the car broke down or when someone needed a ride to the doctor. These women became a lifeline. They didn't ask me for explanations I couldn't give. They just showed up, and that mattered. I also found comfort in volunteering. At first, I helped serve meals at a shelter once a month. Then I started mentoring women younger than me who were trying to rebuild after divorce or job loss. I showed them how to budget, how to keep track of bills, how to plan for taxes. Passing on what I knew gave me purpose. It reminded me that my knowledge and time still had value, even if my own family didn't want it. Friendships grew from unexpected places. 2. A neighbor knocked on my door one winter to ask if I had jumper cables. I helped her out, and from then on we traded dinners once a week. Small connections like that filled spaces that used to feel unbearable. But no matter how much I kept busy, the ache never went away completely. Some nights I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and wonder where Tom was living. I wondered if he ever thought of me. I wondered if Julia told the children stories about me, or if she had erased me completely. Social media didn't help. It only rubbed salt in the wound. I saw photos posted by friends of friends, holiday gatherings, school events. I recognized faces I hadn't seen in years, all standing together, like a puzzle with one piece missing. That piece was me. After a while, I stopped looking. It only fed the hurt. Still, life had to move forward. I found myself in routines that gave me steadiness. I got up, went to work, kept the house in order, and showed up where I said I would. The women at church reminded me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who stand by you when you have nothing left to give. 10 years is a long time to live without your child. Long enough to realize the silence itself is a decision. Long enough to know the milestones you missed will never come back. long enough to teach yourself how to stand up even when your heart stays heavy. And yet, deep down, I carried a small hope. I thought maybe one day the door would open or the phone would ring, or I'd hear a knock and see Tom's face again. I told myself if that day came, I'd be ready. I didn't know then that it would happen in the most unexpected way. Inside the bakery I built without them, with Tom and Julia walking in after 10 silent years, asking me for work as if nothing had ever happened. Imagine finding out you're a grandmother in the grocery store line from someone who thought you already knew. If you think I deserved better, then support me here, like, share, and subscribe. And if you don't want to subscribe, fine. But explain in the comments why my story isn't worth that click. I want to hear it. By the time I turned 65, I had a choice to make. Most people at the office were planning their retirement parties, talking about fishing trips, or finally staying home to rest. I knew I couldn't just stop working and sit in a chair all day. I had done that once before after Tom left, and it nearly swallowed me whole. I needed something to get up for, a reason to put my shoes on each morning. I thought back to what had always brought me calm. For me, it was baking. Bread, pies, biscuits, things I'd made since I was a girl. On the weekends, I would knead dough at my kitchen counter, and for a few hours the world felt steady. I gave loaves to neighbors, pies to church suppers, and cookies to the women's group. Every time, someone would say, "Ruby, you should open a place of your own." I'd laugh it off, but those words stayed with me. So when my last year at the trucking company rolled around, I looked at my savings and asked myself, what am I waiting for? I didn't want a cruise or a condo in Florida. I wanted a project that would keep my hands busy and my mind sharp. That's when the idea of a bakery cafe took root. It wasn't easy. I wasn't some young entrepreneur with endless energy. I was a woman in her mid-60s, with careful savings and no room for mistakes. I met with a banker, showed him my numbers, and convinced him I was serious. I signed a modest lease on a corner spot not far from my apartment, and I rolled up my sleeves. The first months were a blur. I stripped down old counters, painted walls, and found used ovens that still had life in them. I hired a plumber to fix the sinks and a carpenter to build shelves for flour and sugar bins. At night, I fell into bed bone-tired, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. When the doors finally opened, I didn't know if anyone would come. I put a chalkboard sign outside that read, "Fraser's Bakery, fresh bread daily." On that first morning, I sold out before noon. The next day, a few of the same faces came back, and they brought friends. Word spread fast in the neighborhood. Soon, the cafe wasn't just a place to buy bread. It became a meeting spot. Retired couples stopped in after their morning walks. Parents grabbed muffins on the way to school drop-off. A group of older men made it their routine to drink coffee in the corner booth and swap stories. On Saturdays, families lined up for pies. The shop filled with voices and laughter, and I realized I hadn't felt that kind of warmth in a long time. The bakery gave me purpose. It wasn't about making money. I'd never get rich selling bread. It was about having a place where people gathered, where my work meant something real to someone else. When a young mother told me her little boy wouldn't eat breakfast unless it was my banana bread, it made me smile all day. When a man said my rolls tasted like the ones his grandmother used to bake, I felt like I had done something good. I managed the cafe with the same habits that kept me afloat all those years. Careful bookkeeping, no wasted supplies, everything written down. The lessons I'd learned the hard way became the backbone of my business. I wasn't afraid of long hours because I'd worked them my whole life. I knew how to stretch a dollar and how to keep going when I was tired. The shop became my second act. It was mine, built with no help from Tom or Julia. Every shelf, every recipe, every customer who walked through the door was proof that I could still stand strong. But it wasn't just about bread and coffee. It was about community. I hosted small Bible study groups at the back tables on weekday mornings. I let the high school kids use the space to practice guitar after closing hours. During the holidays, I set out a donation jar for local families in need, and customers filled it without hesitation. The bakery gave me a new circle, a chosen family. When I unlocked the doors each morning, I didn't feel the old weight of being left behind. I felt the steady rhythm of people who showed up because they wanted to. Looking back, I think building that shop saved me. It gave me back the confidence I lost when Tom took my savings and disappeared. It reminded me that I wasn't finished yet, that I still had something to give. And that is why the morning Tom and Julia walked in, after 10 years of silence, I felt a strange kind of strength. They didn't see a woman they could take advantage of again. They saw someone who had survived without them, who had built a business from scratch and filled it with life. The bakery wasn't just a place where bread rose in the oven. It was where I rose again after being knocked down harder than I ever thought I could bear. The day Tom and Julia stepped into my bakery after 10 years was one I'll never forget. I had been wiping down the counter, stacking plates back where they belonged, when the bell over the door rang. At first, I didn't even look up, but then I heard his voice. Just one word, Mom. My head jerked up, and there he was. Tom stood a few feet inside, his shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding mine. Julia walked in close behind him, holding a practiced smile that didn't hide much. And then, just behind them, 2 teenagers, my grandchildren. Kids I had never met, not once in their lives. I stood still, cloth in my hand, trying to take it all in. 10 years of silence, and suddenly they were in front of me. Tom had gray in his hair, lines on his face that hadn't been there before. Julia looked tired too, though she tried hard to keep her composure. The children shifted nervously, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. I motioned toward a booth in the corner. I didn't want this conversation in front of the regulars who were sipping coffee by the window. They followed me, sliding into the booth, while I sat across from them. My hands rested on the table, steady even though my chest felt tight. It was Julia who started. Ruby, thank you for sitting with us. We know it's been a long time. Things haven't gone the way we planned. We thought maybe you could help us now. I looked straight at her. Help you how? Tom cleared his throat. We need work, Mom. I lost my job last year. Julia's hours at the school were cut. Bills are piling up. We thought maybe you could hire us here. Just something steady to get us through. I stared at them, silent for a long moment. My son, who had taken every cent of my life savings and vanished, was now sitting in my bakery asking me for a job. Not a word of apology, not a single mention of the years they had erased me from their lives. Straight to business, as if I were an employer and not the mother they had abandoned. My eyes went to the teenagers. They looked uncomfortable, their hands folded on the table. The girl glanced at me with curiosity. The boy kept staring at his lap. I wondered if they even knew who I was. I turned back to Tom. You've been gone 10 years. No calls, no letters, no visits. And now you're here because you want me to put you on the payroll. He shifted, rubbing his hands together. A nervous habit he'd had since childhood. I know it looks bad, but we didn't know where else to turn. Julia leaned in, her voice smooth but urgent. We thought maybe this could also be a chance to reconnect, to put the past behind us. Working here could bring us back together. Her words stung. For a decade, they had decided I wasn't part of their lives. They had kept me out of birthdays, graduations, holidays. I had learned about the grandchildren from neighbors and social media, never from them. And now they wanted to talk about reconnecting because they needed something. I folded my hands and kept my tone even. It's interesting that reconnecting comes up when you're struggling, but not when the kids were born, not when you had family gatherings, not when I spent holidays alone. Tom's face reddened. "We made mistakes," he said quickly, "but we're here now. Isn't that what matters?" The anger that rose in me wasn't loud. It was steady. Being here now doesn't erase 10 years. You didn't just forget me. You chose not to include me. And you think I can just hand you jobs because you finally walked through my door? Julia tried again, her voice softer this time. "Ruby, we know what happened before hurt you, but people change. We've had hard times. We need a fresh start." I sat back and studied them. Julia's polished words couldn't hide the truth. They weren't here to mend the relationship. They were here because they were desperate. The boy finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Dad said you might let us work here. I could wash dishes or sweep floors." His honesty cut through the tension. He wasn't asking out of pride. He was just a kid looking for a way to help. I softened a little as I looked at him, then at the girl beside him. They hadn't made the choices that led to this moment. They hadn't shut me out for 10 years. They were caught in the middle. But my gaze went back to Tom. Why now? Why come to me after all this time? He dropped his head, his voice low. "Because we're out of options. We're behind on the mortgage. The bills keep coming. I thought maybe you'd understand." Understand. That word twisted in me. Did he understand what it had been like for me, starting over at 55 with nothing? Did he understand the years of silence? The milestones I had missed, the grandchildren I didn't get to hold as babies? I felt the tension press down on the booth, every eye waiting for my answer. A decade of absence sat between us like a wall. Their request wasn't small. It wasn't just about jobs. It was about whether I would let them walk back into my life as if those 10 years had never happened. Inside, I wrestled with two truths. One, they had hurt me in ways that still ached. Two, they were still my son and his family sitting in front of me now because their lives had unraveled. The bakery was quiet except for the hum of the ovens. I glanced around the room at the tables where neighbors had built me up when my own child had torn me down. This place was proof of what I could do without them. And now they were asking to be part of it. I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. "You came here for jobs. But before I answer, you need to understand something. This place wasn't handed to me. I built it from scratch after you left me, with nothing. Every brick, every table, every loaf of bread. I made it happen without you. So don't sit here and think I'll forget what you did just because you need help now." Tom's shoulders slumped. Julia's smile faded. The teenagers stayed quiet, looking between us. The tension sat heavy. I knew then this wasn't going to be a simple yes or no. This was going to be the moment I decided what role they would or would not play in the life I had built without them. I sat there in that booth with Tom, Julia, and the two kids staring back at me, and I felt the weight of everything they had said, or rather, everything they had left unsaid. They wanted jobs. They wanted me to pretend the last 10 years hadn't happened. But the truth was, I hadn't forgotten a thing. I excused myself without explanation and walked toward the back office. I could feel Julia's eyes follow me, probably worried I'd just send them out right then. But I had something I needed to do, something I'd prepared for long ago, even if I didn't realize it at the time. On the top shelf of my office closet sat a small file box. It wasn't large, just a plain box I had kept for years. Inside it were the reminders, the papers, and envelopes I could never throw away, proof of what had been done to me, proof that I wasn't imagining things. I picked it up and carried it back to the booth. Setting it on the table, I watched Tom shift uncomfortably. He knew what it was before I even opened it. I flipped back the lid and pulled out the first item, a withdrawal slip from my bank. The numbers written in neat black ink showed the exact amount I had taken out for him and Julia. I slid it across the table. "Do you remember this?" I asked, my voice steady. Tom glanced at it, then dropped his eyes. "Yeah," he muttered. "That," I said, tapping the slip, "was my security, 30 years of careful saving, gone in one transaction. Money I planned to live on in retirement. Money I trusted you with. You promised you'd pay me back." The boy leaned closer, reading the paper. His brow furrowed. He looked from me to his father, confused. Next, I pulled out a copy of the loan papers I had signed to help them cover the remainder of the franchise startup costs. The thick black signature at the bottom was mine. I placed it in front of Julia. "You remember this too?" I said to her. "You both sat in my kitchen and convinced me this was safe. I didn't want to do it, but I did because I believed in you." Julia tried to keep her voice smooth. "That was years ago, Ruby. We had every intention." I cut her off. "Intention doesn't pay bills. Intention doesn't erase the years you disappeared, while I was left with nothing." I reached back into the box and pulled out a stack of envelopes, letters I had written in the early years after they vanished. I slid them out one by one. "These," I said, "are the letters I mailed. Birthdays, holidays, notes just asking how you were. Not one was answered." The girl's eyes widened as she looked at the stack. She picked one up and read the return address, my handwriting clear. "Dad, you never told us about these." Tom rubbed his forehead, his face red. He didn't answer. I picked up the final piece. An envelope with my handwriting on the front, returned to me by the post office. A bright red stamp on it read, "Return to sender." It was a Christmas card I had mailed during the first year of silence. Inside I had written a simple note. "I love you no matter what. Please call me." That envelope had sat in my drawer for years. I laid it down between us. That, I said quietly, was when I finally understood. You weren't too busy. You weren't too embarrassed. You made a choice to cut me out. The table went silent. The kids' eyes darted between the papers, their father and me. The boy finally spoke. "Dad, is this true? You told us Grandma didn't want to be part of things. You said she pulled away." Tom swallowed hard. His shoulders sagged. "I didn't want you to think badly of us," he whispered. The girl looked at him, hurt in her eyes. "But you lied." She tried. Julia stiffened, her voice sharp. "We didn't lie. We made decisions that were best for our family. Things were complicated." I looked at her directly. "Complicated? I wrote letters. I called. I sent cards. You returned them. You let the kids grow up thinking I didn't care. That's not complicated. That's deliberate." The boy pushed back in his seat, shaking his head. "Why would you do that?" he asked his parents. Tom pressed his palms together, staring at the table. His shame was written all over his face. I gathered the papers back into a neat pile, but left them on the table for everyone to see. "These are my receipts," I said. "Every slip, every envelope, every unanswered letter. This is proof of what you did and what you chose not to do." Julia's polished tone cracked. "Ruby, you're digging up the past. We came here because we're struggling. Why can't you just let it go?" I leaned forward. "Because the past is why we're here. You think you can skip over 10 years of silence and ask me for a job like none of it happened. But I won't let you rewrite what you did." The kids stayed quiet now, their faces pale. For the first time, they were hearing the truth. I closed the file box and set my hands flat on the lid. This isn't just about money. It's about family, about trust, and you broke both. You left me with nothing and then told the kids a story that erased me. So before we talk about jobs, before we talk about anything else, you need to face what really happened. The tension at that table was heavy. Julia looked ready to argue more, but the kid's expressions stopped her. Tom stared at the box, like it might swallow him whole. I sat back, calmer now than I'd been in years. For once, the truth was on the table, not hidden, not twisted, but laid out plain in black and white. And I knew then, no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. Those papers were my proof. Every slip, every letter, every unanswered card. Proof that I tried, and proof that they erased me anyway. If that moment made you feel something, don't just sit there and watch. Subscribe and share, because my voice deserves to be heard after 10 years of silence. And if you won't subscribe, then I dare you, comment below and tell me why you'd ignore someone who finally spoke their truth. The papers still sat on the table between us. The truth spread out where no one could deny it anymore. Tom stared at his hands, Julia clenched her jaw, and the kids sat stiff, their faces a mix of shock and confusion. For years they had been told one story, and now they were staring at proof of another. I let the silence hang for a moment before I spoke. I've thought about this day for a long time. I didn't know when or how it would happen, but I knew if you ever came back, it would be because you needed something. And here we are. Julia shifted, her tone sharp. So what? You're just going to sit there and throw the past in our faces? We came here asking for help, not judgment. I kept my voice steady. Help is one thing. Trust is another. You broke that when you took everything I had and disappeared. I built this bakery with my own 2 hands after you left me with nothing. I will not risk it by putting you in charge of any part of it. Tom finally looked up, his eyes tired. So that's it? You won't even give us a chance. We're your family. Family shows up, I answered firmly. Family doesn't vanish for 10 years and then walk back in only when the bills are due. You want a job? Go find one somewhere else. I won't gamble my livelihood again. Julia slammed her hand lightly on the table. This is unbelievable. You have all of this now, your own business, steady income, and you can't even find it in your heart to help your own son. I leaned in, my voice low but clear. I can't help someone who still refuses to admit what they did. You didn't just take my money. You took my peace. You cut me out of your lives and left me wondering if I even mattered. That's not something I forget because you're desperate now. The kids sat frozen, listening. The boy finally spoke, his voice soft. Grandma, I'd like to help here. I can sweep, wash dishes, whatever you need. I turned toward him, and for the first time that day, I felt my chest loosen just a little. You'd be welcome, sweetheart. Both of you would. There's always room for someone willing to work hard and show up. But let me be clear, if you two want jobs, they'll be yours, not your parents'. The girl glanced at her brother, then back at me. She nodded slowly. I'd like that too. Maybe at the counter after school. Julia's face flushed red. Absolutely not. They're still kids. They don't need to be dragged into this. I kept my eyes on her. I'm not dragging them into anything. I'm offering them an opportunity to learn responsibility, to earn their own money, and to build something for themselves. I will not punish them for the choices you made. Tom's voice cracked. You'd give them jobs, but not me? Do you know how humiliating that is? Yes, I said plainly. But humiliation isn't worse than what I lived through when you left me broke and silent. Actions have consequences. Tom, this is yours. The kids looked at their parents, then back at me. The boy gave a small, almost invisible smile, like he understood. The girl whispered, "Thank you." Julia stood abruptly, pushing back from the booth. This is ridiculous. Come on, Tom. We don't need this. But Tom didn't move right away. His shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the stack of papers I had shown them. For a brief moment, I thought he might apologize, might finally take responsibility. But instead, he just stood slowly and muttered, "Let's go." The kids hesitated, their eyes lingering on me. I gave them a small nod, a silent message that my door was open if they ever wanted to come back. Julia stormed toward the door, her heels hitting the tile hard. Tom followed, his steps slower, his face pale. The kids trailed behind, caught between their parents' anger and the glimmer of something new they had just been offered. When the door closed behind them, the bakery was quiet again. The regulars by the window pretended they hadn't heard a word, but I knew they had. Still, I didn't feel embarrassed. For once, I felt steady. I had drawn my line. I would not be used again. But I had also opened a small door for the next generation, one that didn't involve lies or silence. And as I sat there alone at the booth, I realized something important. I hadn't just said no to Tom and Julia. I had said yes to myself. When the door finally closed behind Tom and Julia, the bakery fell quiet again. The hum of the ovens in the back and the clink of spoons in coffee cups filled the space they had left. I stood for a moment, breathing in slowly, then walked to the counter, poured myself a cup of coffee, and carried it to a corner table. I sat there and let the last hour replay in my mind. 10 years of silence, and when they finally came back, it wasn't with an apology or even a simple "we missed you." It was with a request for jobs. If you had told me years ago that I would be strong enough to sit across from them and say no, I might not have believed you. But there I was, steady, clear, and calm. I realized something important as I sat at that table. I no longer felt powerless. I no longer felt desperate for Tom's approval the way I used to. I didn't ache for him to recognize me or invite me back into his life. The silence had taught me a hard lesson, that my worth wasn't tied to his choices. Instead, I felt a quiet calm. I had set a boundary that protected me, and at the same time, I had left the door open for the grandchildren. They hadn't made the decisions that shut me out. They were innocent, and I wasn't going to let bitterness fall on them. Offering them a place in the bakery was my way of breaking the cycle without putting myself back in harm's way. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had balanced the scales. That night, after closing, I cleaned the counters slowly. My hands moved across the same space where the papers had been laid out earlier. The bank slips, the loan documents, the returned letters. I slid the chairs back under the tables and turned off the lights one by one. When I locked the front door and walked to my car, I didn't feel heavy. I felt light. Later that week, I went to the women's circle at church. We meet every Wednesday evening in the fellowship hall. There's always coffee, a few casseroles, and more laughter than you'd expect from a group of women who've all lived through loss. When it was my turn to share, I told them what had happened. I spoke about how Tom and Julia showed up after 10 years asking for work. I told them about the file box and the papers I laid on the table. I described the look on the grandchildren's faces when they realized the truth for the first time. When I finished, the room went quiet for a moment. Then one of the women, Ruth, leaned forward and said, "Ruby, you did what most of us wish we could do. You stood your ground. You didn't let guilt run your decision. That takes strength." The others nodded, murmuring their agreement. Another woman added, "You gave the kids a chance without letting yourself be taken advantage of again. That's wisdom." Their words sank deep. For years, I had questioned myself, wondered if I had done something wrong as a mother, if I had driven Tom away. But hearing those women affirm my choice reminded me that protecting myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. Driving home that night, I looked out at the streetlights passing and thought about how far I had come. 10 years ago, I would have folded. I would have handed over what little I had just to keep the peace. But now I knew better. I had rebuilt from nothing once before, and I wasn't about to risk losing it all again. The grandchildren were the only part of the visit that gave me hope. The boy's quiet voice offering to wash dishes. The girl's nod, whispering, "Thank you." I could tell they wanted to know me, maybe even be part of my life. I don't know where that will go, but I know I gave them an open door. And that's enough for now. As for Tom and Julia, they made their choice when they walked out angry. Maybe one day they'll look back and see that my answer wasn't cruelty. It was honesty. But whether they do or not isn't mine to control. What I know is this: I walked through fire and came out stronger. I built a second act with my own hands, and I drew a line that said, "No more." Now, I want to ask you, have you ever had family disappear when you needed them, only to show up when they were desperate? What did you do? Would you have given them jobs? Or would you have stood your ground like I did? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Share your stories in the comments, because you never know who else needs to hear them. And if this story spoke to you, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need encouragement, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because here's the truth I've learned. Family isn't about who comes around when they want something. Family is about who shows up when it matters, who stays, and who chooses you even when it costs them something. And that truth, I've decided, is worth more than any job, any check, or even an apology that may never come.